Okay, I got 6 p.m., so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Um, First item is a call to order, and actually, I'm filling in for our chair, Deborah, so she's gonna be out, so I'm the vice chair, and if I miss a step, I'm sorry about that. I'm pinch hitting for somebody. So, at this time, we have citizen comments. Is this, let me which what this one is here, so, yeah. This is an agenda item, never mind. So are there any, I guess we have any citizens, I don't have any citizen comments, is that correct? Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on. Next item is items for individual consideration. 3A, consider action to approve meeting minutes from the November 18th, 2021 Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting. Commissioners, have you had a chance to look at that, and do you have any corrections? If not, motion?
Make a motion to approve. Second.
All right, go ahead and all in favor? Aye? Aye. All right, motion passes. Okay. All right, item 3B. I understand item 3B is being postponed. Do I still read it out?
Yes, the applicant on this one has actually postponed the item to February to give a little bit more staff. We had a productive meeting yesterday, and we're going to work to try to get to a better place to bring a complete package to y'all. So, so you'll be seeing that again in February.
Okay. All right, moving on to item 3C, consider action on the Lakeside Medical Campus Neighborhood Regulating Plan located on Lakeside Phase 1 and 2, lots 1, 2, and 3, Lakeside Phase 2, Lot 1A and 1BR. That's 11.136 acres within the city of Bastrop, Texas, as attached in Exhibit A as the Lakeside Medical Campus Neighborhood Regulating Plan. Ms. Bills?
Good evening. So this is a neighborhood, this is essentially an appeal of a neighborhood regulating plan. So in our code, for something that already has an existing base zoning that's for the desired building types and block standards, if it's over 3.4 acres, they have to do what's called a neighborhood regulating plan that looks at laying out streets, laying out the buildings, looking at the pedestrian shed, and making sure there's that connectivity. Those are reviewed and approved administratively if they meet the codes. If staff denies the neighborhood regulating plan, the applicant has the opportunity, they can appeal the staff's decision. In this case, this is kind of unique, so I decided to directly forward it to Planning and Zoning for your consideration in this instance. So what we're looking at tonight is neighborhood regulating plan for the Lakeside Medical Campus that's on State Highway 71 to the east side of town. You can see the aerial of the site here. So just a little bit of background. The site was built in the mid-2000s. It consists of 3 different buildings. It was built under previous codes and previous planning and zoning and city council approvals. When the B3 code was adopted, and this was something that we discussed when it was adopted, that any legally existing site or structure at the time of the B3 code adoption is considered a legal non-conforming use that can be continued for as long as it's there, unless there's some, the new code compliance can be triggered in certain circumstances, and that is if the site use is discontinued for more than 6 months, if the site is destroyed by more than 50%, and any of the expansions to the site need to try to meet the B3 codes. And that's something that on a non-conforming site like that, we address on a case-by-case basis when they come in and are making changes, or the site has been destroyed, or the site has been discontinued for more than 6 months. And through that process, once staff makes the determination, if there's a disagreement on that, the Zoning Board of Adjustment is the one who would hear that case and make the decision if the change or the existing or rebuilding a non-conforming site can be continued. So that's the process that was adopted in our code. That's a very common code requirement in all codes, and it was actually in our previous code as well. Background on this site, it's 11.136 acres. The whole site is Zone P5 core. which is our highest zoning district for commercial, office, and retail. On our future land use plan, it's called out as being professional services. It's 5 commercial lots. 3 of them are occupied with structures, and there are 2 vacant sites. It takes access off of the State Highway 71 and then Majestic Pine Street to the east. And the stormwater on the site drains to an existing pond in the middle of the site, or to the west of the site that kind of serves that area. So in their neighborhood regulating plan, they provided some exhibits that show the dedicated right-of-way street perimeter, which consists of some unbuilt streets, would show to be a little over, or almost 9,000 square feet of a perimeter. If you consider using the internal private drives in Majestic Pines, that perimeter becomes 2,341 feet. In our code, for P5 core, the base is to build the 330 building block grid, which is a 1,320-foot block perimeter. So this, even with using the private drives, it exceeds those standards. Here's the drawing. It's kind of hard to see, but that's the public right-of-way block perimeter. Only a part of the section of Majestic Pines is actually constructed, and of course 71. The applicant is using, let's see if I can actually go, there we go. The internal street grid there, you can see, kind of provides almost 1 farm lot. So we detailed out some of the significant neighborhood regulating plan deviations that this development does not promote multimodal connectivity. The 1 lot towards the back doesn't have any street frontage. The development doesn't comply with the adopted public frontage plans, which public frontage plan is that interaction between the public realm and the private properties, which consists of public sidewalks, street trees, street lights. It exceeds the block length and block perimeter requirements. It contains parking in the first and second layers, which that's in front of the buildings, between the streets. And the lot occupation does not meet the minimum coverage at the build-to line, so we have some requirements of how wide buildings need to be on each lot to create that street frontage. And due to all these considerations, staff's recommendation is to deny, and the applicant is here, I believe, if you have questions of him.
Does anybody have any questions of Ms. Bills?
Okay, I'm on. The only question I have is, this is such a unique case because it's a medical facility, and I know with our B3 codes, P5 is what they fall, but it seems it's, perhaps we should have taken into consideration at some point this would have been another place. I just think a B5, and I get it falls in that. I'm just saying it's kind of unique because it is a medical facility, so some of the conditions, such as if you have ambulances coming in, things like that, the parking is going to be a whole different situation, or patients, you know, going in. So that's my question of, it's kind of a unique situation.
So that's kind of the question. Our code is form-based, which is talking about pulling the buildings up to the street, having the parking behind. So I think you'd still be able to accomplish a lot of those things with the bays, drop-offs, and those are all things that I think we could consider in a neighborhood regulating plan or a zoning concept scheme when they come up. In this case, the question is, do we want to codify what's already there because it's there, and that if it burns down tomorrow, they get to put it back exactly the same way, or do you want them to go through that exercise at the time? So, and that's kind of how the process works. If something doesn't meet, same with the First National Bank, they had some things that they didn't, agree with in the code. They brought it to y'all. You guys considered it and made some changes to the code. So the question is do we want to hard code in everything that's there today because it's already there, or do we want to when there's actually a change made, address it at that point, so.
I think that was my question, because it wasn't clear that I could see, are they trying to make a change now, or are we just trying to kind of solidify things for future change?
The their project letter said that they have a clouded title and it's causing the site to be unsellable. We didn't get any backup information about that, so that's just what they stated in their letter. That's their reasoning.
Can you define for me, forget the word that's in the language, it's not, because it's not vacated, unusable, what was the word that was used in the 6 months? Back to that slide for me.
Let's see if I can find where I
That
was.
one.
Discontinued.
Discontinued, so no portion of it is, what would be considered discontinued? Or
That the site would be totally unoccupied.
unoccupied,
Yeah,
right? So the
usually
two
no
vacant
utilities.
lots
Yeah.
don't factor into
No,
that.
as to our knowledge, all the buildings are occupied at this stage. And that's one of those that if a building does remain unoccupied for more than 6 months, that's something that, if they're actively trying to re-rent it and do things like that, and we know they're trying to do that, usually that's taken into consideration.
I too feel like because it is a medical facility, because there was some language in here about the walkability, I would think that something like that wouldn't fall under the scope because it is a medical facility. So I had a hard time trying to reconcile why there would be a need for some of the restrictions, walkability being one of them because of the neighborhoods nearby. So, yeah, I'm kind of wanting to know why the denial as well. I personally, just from reading through it, if they're wanting to just kind of secure some future plans, secure this so that if they do any future planning, I do think some of the code definitely needs to be met. But I guess I would need to know a little bit more about what those plans were for us to be able to make that decision.
Yeah. At this point, we don't have any future plans from them. It's just what's already there. In fact, there's 2 vacant lots that no information was provided for, so we're assuming those will remain vacant moving forward, so.
Matt, did you have some?
I want to ask, because, certainly I kind of agree. We've kind of got a process started here that is going to remain in some way the way it is. But so as far as this clarification, they're wanting to know if they're going to be required to put in sidewalks, connectivities, and trees. And there's certainly aspects to the code. Certainly tearing down a building and moving it to the highway is a bit of a stretch, to enforce. But as far as sidewalks, trees, walkability, that's pretty easy stuff to put in during the development process. And so are we saying we're going to forego all this, or?
That's the request, is to forego all of that at this point, in hard code in. So, yeah, so if a building, if they want to add on to a building, we're going to look at it at that time to see how it can meet the B3 codes. What aspects can meet, and we would go through that exercise at that point. At this point, nothing's changing, and we're not asking them to change anything either, so.
Well, certainly there are certain aspects of the B3 codes that are fairly easy to meet that weren't in the old code. And there's others that are going to be quite difficult for the site to meet.
Yes.
And so certainly it seems very difficult to make a generalized judgment at this point, not knowing what's being requested other than I want to keep doing things the way we did it 10 years ago.
And that's, to our knowledge, the request that's at hand today, so.
Yes.
Turn on your mic. Sorry.
It wasn't working a second ago. So this was sent in when they were looking to sell the Texas Oncology building that's in the back, correct?
Yes.
So is this basically just a clarification so that when they go to sell it, the next person who comes in doesn't have to abide, if they decide to tear that building down, they don't have to abide by B3, they're grandfathered into the old building codes? Or, because that's what is catching me right here, is that they're trying to sell it, so they want to make sure that whoever buys it can do whatever they want to and not have to stay with the new regulations. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes, so they won't, so we have, what we provide is, it's called a zoning verification letter. So when the property's being sold, and we get these all the time around town,
Okay.
one of the questions that is asked is, does this meet the current site plan requirements today? And usually we'll say this was permitted under a previous code, it's considered legal nonconforming, we're not requiring any changes. Some changes may need to be made in the future if something, if there's an add-on, or if the building is destroyed. Usually that's kind of, I think, an insurance question. If this building burns down tomorrow, can I build it back exactly the way it is today? And
Or if
usually,
somebody buys this and decides to tear down the old Texas Oncology
Yeah.
building, they can build whatever they want based off of old codes rather than having to adhere to the new codes.
yeah,
Okay,
and
that's
that's,
what
I
I was
think, where
curious.
the question is, and we're saying, you know, you'd have to come into compliance with the new code.
You'd have to come in compliance with B3. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments?
I think once we hear from the developer, some of our questions probably
Okay.
answered too.
And I think you hit it on the nail on the head. It's what's going to happen. Are we going to not allow the B3 to be implemented on this side versus saying, no, they need to comply with it, moving, once they sell and the next tenant or the next person wants to do something?
It just seems like it's not for now, it's for
Yes.
later or for easing the sale.
And I think the staff did their job identifying that as the issue. So do we have the
I think,
client? Yes. If you could just state your name.
Yes, my name is Lee Jackson, and I am here representing 4 different owners. So we're not talking about just the Texas Oncology building. We're talking about the freestanding emergency department that is occupied by St. David's Healthcare. We're talking about the 34,000 square foot medical office building that houses 39 different doctors. We're talking about the Texas Oncology building, which is the only cancer center in the city of Bastrop at this time. And we're also talking about 2 vacant lots on there. So first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm really glad to be here. And I wanted to say that we are here to ask your approval for the neighborhood regulating plan that has been submitted on behalf of these 4 owners for the Lakeside Medical Campus Neighborhood Regulating Plan. And the reason I am standing before you here today is because the B3 code makes no provision whatsoever for healthcare or medical uses. Okay?
That's correct.
It makes zero, let me say that again, it makes zero provision for healthcare and medical uses.
It's form-based, correct?
Okay. And as such, what has happened, because there was a void when it came to the new zoning regulation and assigning different zoning requirements to the various lots, both healthcare campuses, not just ours, but the Ascension Seton campus was also designated P5 core zoning. Okay? I don't know what played into the decision of all the varying other types, what caused the city to want to zone that P5 core zoning. But as you have heard from Allison, it has created a plethora of areas where we do not comply. So yes, we are legal non-conforming, meaning that if we don't touch anything, we don't add additional healthcare services to Bastrop, God forbid, then we can go on as we are currently doing our business. Not just us, but St. David's, if they wanted to expand their emergency department, which, by the way, sees 4 times the typical load that one of their freestanding emergency departments sees. So it's pulling from a huge area, Bastrop County, Fayette County, Lee County. They do an incredible amount of business there. They may want to expand someday. We own the 34,000 square foot building. Our building is an L. We would like to fill that building in. We're completely full on the building today. We have 39 doctors. We have Bastrop Family Health was taken over by Premier Family Physicians. Second largest independent primary care group in town. They've added 4 doctors between their Smithville and their Bastrop location already, with plans to add more. Right now, they gave me a list of 6 surgeons, specialists, where they are telling them they have to, because they need the space that they were subleasing to them, they're going to have to be out by February or March of next year. So we have no place to put these doctors, and we would love to be able to expand the building in the future. It's our understanding when we go to expand the building that whatever addition that we put on there is going to have to comply with, my understanding is the P5 core zoning. I don't think anywhere in the neighborhood regulating plan do we say, hey, we want to be under our old C1 zoning, which I don't think is even possible. Legally, you guys have changed all the zoning to the B3 code. So we are P5 core zoning until the city of Bastrop, hopefully someday, says, hey, this is very difficult on developers of healthcare and users of healthcare, because they're going to have to come to us and ask for a plethora of variances every time they want to expand services or add a new location or what have you. Someday you guys may do that. Every other city that I've worked with, Bastrop, Leander, Georgetown, Buda, Kyle, all of them have medical, they have healthcare designations in their zoning code. And so what we're asking for right now is just simply allow us to, because we do want to do expansion, this is not just about selling Texas Oncology, though that did create a cloud on the title. The lender won't touch it until, so there's value that's being lost. We've got a great buyer or Gary's got a Shift Properties has a great buyer to potentially buy that. It's still going to be Texas Oncology. It's still going to operate as a cancer center. But if that cancer center ever wanted to expand, they could approach you, but then we go through a laundry list again of all the things, some of the items like you had mentioned earlier, Matt, you mentioned that some of them, like trees and landscaping, when we do an expansion, anybody does an expansion, the city can come back and say, we want to see more trees. We want to see more connectivity, add some sidewalks. Those things are all allowed under the current P5 code, but the P5 code was really designed for a mixed-use, high-density. In fact, let me read that to you because it's really relative. So this is the definition of the P5 core zoning code. This is the definition under the B3 code for the Place 5 or P5 type core zoning. Higher density mixture of building types that accommodate commercial, retail, offices, row houses, and apartments. It has a tight network of streets with wide sidewalks, steady street tree plantings, and buildings set close to the sidewalks. P5 is highly walkable area. A continuous line of buildings is critical to define the public frontage and allow for visible activity along the street edge. If you just take that last part, a continuous line of buildings is critical to define the public frontage. What they're saying is that under the code, 80% of your building footprint has to sit at the front of your property. And all of the parking has to sit in the back. And that's a beautiful look for a high-density town center area that you're trying to do, where you're combining walkable streets and merchants and apartment complexes and retail and general office and all that under a real tight setting. And that's going to work in lots of areas, but just in 27 years of developing hospitals and surgical hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers, medical office buildings, I've never seen it work. And what I gave you there, if you look at the three sheets that I gave you, the first one, you'll have to help me because I don't have one, but I think the first one is the Bastrop Ascension Seton campus. If you look at that campus, that is a micro-hospital. And what they've done is they placed that towards the center of that site with parking around it. And the reason hospitals do that is so that they can expand. They don't know if they're going to need to expand women's services or their cardiology unit or their dietary facilities in order to add more food capacity. They don't know because they bought 30, in that case, what does that say, how many acres? 29.5 acres, and they're planning to expand that over the next 50 years in Bastrop. And if you look at the next one, I think it's the Leander one. So that's Leander, that's St. David's healthcare system. They bought a little over 40 acres of land, and they've got a freestanding emergency department, and they've got a medical office building. And again, they build it in the center with parking all around. They don't take those, and as Allison has indicated, that they can put those, that it would work. If they put those buildings at the front and put all the parking at the back, it wouldn't work. Wouldn't work for healthcare. And so that's what we're asking you to consider here, is to pass the neighborhood regulating plan. And to basically say, listen, any expansion that we do, we want to, for what we have there today, we want to be in a conforming use, okay? And then if we do any expansions to that, we're glad for you guys to come in and say, okay, certain things we want you to do, but we don't want to open the can of worms in case it's not you guys, it's somebody else who's in the commission. And they say, you know, we really like, you know, one of your buildings burned half down. We want you to take that, the next building, we want you to push it to the front. Because then what we would have to say is, I'm sorry, we're gonna leave Bastrop because it doesn't work for healthcare. And I mean, right now, I've been hired and engaged by a large healthcare system to go out and buy 50 acres of land to build a future campus for them in the Austin MSA. I know what I'm talking about. I've been doing this for a long time. And so, and I want Bastrop to continue to grow. We want to add additional physicians and to grow our facilities. And we also don't want you to be in a situation where you're competing with other thriving communities out there, and they've got zoning in place to support healthcare, and you're saying, essentially, we've got a P5 core zoning. We know it doesn't have anything to do with healthcare, but we're gonna ask you one item by item to comply to that. And that's gonna put you guys in a difficult place in the future. So thank you for hearing me out. I'm open to receive any questions. Matt?
Any questions?
Yes. So you got the new Del Seaton Medical School, which, from what I've seen, kind of complies nicely with what's being asked of what the P5 would ask of medical campuses in Bastrop today. Even I think of St. David's on UT campus there as well, which is set up close to the road. How would you see these hospitals suffering in the future because of the way they're set close to the roads?
So it's a good question. You're talking about an area of downtown Austin where land sites sell for $20 million for a half acre of land. And your building heights can go up 20 stories. So very different situation because you're building in downtown. And by the way, most hospital systems aren't building downtown anymore. They expand them. Dell built one because they had a medical school they were bringing to that campus, and they wanted to be next to University of Texas, and they were donated land. So I get that, but you don't, if you go around Texas cities and Dallas, Houston, all of that, you don't typically, you see expansions of existing ones, but you don't see new healthcare systems popping up in those areas. And those are high density areas. You know, but Bastrop, Bastrop isn't going to look like that for a long time. And so typically what the healthcare systems will do is they'll go out and, again, buy anywhere from 25 acres of land up to 50 acres of land. And they'll build their facilities in the center with parking all the way around. And you need that because you have nursing mothers and you have elderly folks who are in wheelchairs and walkers. You can't ask them to park in the 18th row away from a building. You can't ask them to go through a 30-foot driveway to get around a big building and then park in the back, because healthcare systems are set up as wings. And that's just the way they've always been designed. The densest location that I've seen, we built a 42,000 square foot building out in Lakeway, right across from Baylor Scott and White's Hospital. That's on 11.6 acres of land. That's a 106-bed hospital. And that's not on the front of the road. That's the densest, other than a downtown location like the Texas Medical Center or the one you mentioned, Matt. That's the densest development that I've seen out there in Lakeway. And so, anyways, hopefully that answers your question.
So I have a question. So you're asking basically to have the non-conforming language removed from the zoning profile that was given, is that correct?
It is our understanding through Trey Job that our only mechanism under the current B3 code zoning would be to go through a neighborhood regulating plan, because you as the commission or the city council, if appealed, would have the ability to be able to say, okay, within that neighborhood regulating plan, you're still P5 core zoning, but we're basically going to say you're in compliance with what you currently have there today. You would not be in a non-conformance status on all the issues that we've talked about. And that's what we hope. And then we hope that this is just an interim solution. We hope that the city goes back and applies a specific designation or category of zoning for healthcare, and then we're glad to rezone. And that can be part of our neighborhood regulating plan. You can specify that in there, that we would, as soon as you guys create a healthcare zoning category that actually applies to us and what we're doing, then we would rezone the property to that. We just don't want to be, because we want to expand our buildings, because we are trying to, I mean, we're right now going through a re-syndication, a refinance of our building. Why? Because I need about another $5 million to potentially expand the building by another 10,000 feet. And so lenders don't like to see, the first thing they require in due diligence is they require you to show that you're in compliance with your existing use and under the existing code. There's a big red flag there that says you're not in compliance. And not only you're not in compliance on a few little things, but here's a laundry list of things. Your buildings don't even sit in the right area. You're against the code because you have parking all the way around your building. So that's the issue at hand for us.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like an umpire calling balls and strikes, and clearly that was a ball, you know, what we're seeing here. So I think staff did it right, and then you're coming to us and basically saying it wasn't really that. And so you want basically for us to say, you know, what we have in our B3, but maybe we can create an overlay. So I'll ask Jennifer, is there a way to kind of meet in the middle there and have an overlay of some kind?
So my understanding was this time was of the essence of this, and so a zoning overlay or any of that will have to go through the full public process. That'll probably take at least 6 months, so would be my guess, because we're still that's gonna have to come back to you, come back to the council twice, and we're gonna have to go through the review period of setting up that overlay language for that. So this was, Mr. Job suggested this as the quickest process for the applicant. To go through the zoning process to change the zoning code will be a public process, because we're actually going to be changing the B3 code, not just because we're creating a new district. Yeah,
right.
So
could we put any language in this, say a motion was made to add some of that or to go through that process at a later time?
I mean, you can recommend that to council, because again, this,
right.
You guys are just, I mean, well, this is, you guys are approving this. I think you'd have to forward that to council for their approval. So
But maybe it could
to
be
come back to actually start
Right.
a process of changing the B3 code. So
I see.
council will have to direct that. So
Time-wise, is this the case? Time is of the essence. What did tell us about that?
Yeah, because we have these 6 surgeons that need space, we would love to be able to immediately roll into an application for a site development plan application to expand the building. And so we would prefer not, and our doctors would prefer not to wait 6 months to start that process. It's kind of useless if, you know, to start a process like that, spend the money, get architects, civil engineers involved, et cetera, if you don't know you're going to be able to get the entitlements that are required to be able to do so. We had the, prior to the B3 code, we were great. I contacted the city, I contacted Allison, in fact, and talked to her about filling in our building, our L-shaped building. This was back in late 2017. And we talked about that. We have the correct number, we can add parking, we have a pad-ready site to fill in that L-shaped building, the way the building's corridors were aligned. It works perfect to be able to expand out on the first floor.
But you still had to submit.
We still have to go through that
Yeah,
process,
I think that was
right?
kind of the deal.
Yeah.
Just talking is not, you got to go through the process of
Yes.
turning this in, so I
Yeah.
think that's,
Yeah, because we were under the C1 zoning at that
Yes.
time, and that all worked. And Allison said, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to. And then, under the new code, all that's changed. We did not at that time, because we were looking for at that particular time, we were looking for some pre-lease commitments at that time, and that's when Bastrop Family Health was the primary care group in there, and they had 5 doctors. They've got 8 or 9 now.
How far did you get in that process?
We didn't, we.
Was
we
it just,
all-
just
all-
phone
all-
calls?
Yeah, all we did is
Okay.
we placed phone calls. We hired an architect who did a conceptual rendering of
Okay.
what that would look like and laid out a site plan for us, but we never submitted it into the city.
Okay,
It's just been recent that we got that call within the last couple of months from Premier saying, hey, we're going to kick out these 6 doctors. We don't have room for them. And what can you do and how fast can you do it? So,
okay.
any other questions?
So I have a lot of concerns on this, not just because of this, but I think we're going to run into some major issues with medical centers. And this is going to be if it's not this, it's going to be something else coming in, because the way we're growing, it's inevitable. And I don't want our community and our city to suffer because we're not going to be flexible enough to allow expansion of medical facilities. And I do understand the codes, and I understand, but the point when I asked Jennifer was, this, to me, is not a P5, and we don't have anywhere to put them. That's the problem. We don't have anywhere, and we need to fix that, for sure. That's something we need to look at in the future. I think there can be a resolution. This is way too big of a deal to reject, way too big for our city. I just want us to come up with a solution that's going to be agreeable for everyone. You're saying the neighborhood regulating plan right now is what Trey recommended. So you're basically tonight asking us to approve that so you can go forward. You're not asking for exemptions of everything, correct? No. So I just think for the good of this community, we've got to come to some kind of compromise on something that's this important.
And just to clarify, we're asking for exemptions for what's already there, If we go to expand, that's a whole different story.
Right,
go
so
to-
future developments, right, would adhere to what we want, is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
we'll-
Right.
we'll submit to those, and we know we hope that if the city could move quickly, we could have a medical zoning and rezone. As part of our site development plan for expansion, we could just rezone to that medical. But if that doesn't happen, then we're going to have to go through all the variances for that expansion. But at least the city wouldn't be able to come back and say, well, we want you to change what's already there. So that's what we're.
You bring up zoning by use. We specifically stepped away from that and went to form-based because that would have a longer lasting, long-term effect. So that's kind of the nature. You brought up several other cities and their zone by use. And so we would have to radically change all of B3 to try. So we could do an overlay. That's what I understand would be a part of this to me. I agree with you. We got to find a middle ground. We don't want to be inflexible. We certainly want Bastrop to continue to grow, and there's a need for these doctors. And so we got to find a middle ground here. At the same time, we just can't throw away everything that everybody had spoken and said. They want these walkable communities. They want the parking not in the front and a sea of parking to get to the building. So those are all things that were like top of the list of a lot of things that people did not like, the sea of parking and the building. But were they talking about a medical? No. So those are the kind of things, maybe I'm with you. Let's try to meet in the middle
Okay.
And how do we do that, Jennifer? What would you recommend?
I think we need more specificity on, so I guess if you want to approve this as it is, with the stipulation that anything different has to come back. Because that's the thing, is we don't want a blanket neighborhood plan that says you don't have to comply with any of these rules without knowing. This is honestly the first I've heard that they wanted to expand the facility. I wasn't here when they met with Trey and Allison, but this is the first we've heard about that. We've heard that we were holding up the sale of the property not because of expansion thing, so that wasn't, because again, we don't have a problem with the way it is today. It's if it goes away and needs to be rebuilt, or if it expands, that's when we want to go through the exercise of what parts of the B3 code can be complied with, what can't be. Our code builds in that flexibility to have, the staff has the ability to approve those things at the staff level with warrants, and even at the neighborhood regulating plan level. But we need that detail of, well, why is it better than our existing code? What are you trying to accomplish? And to be frank, we get this all the time as well. I do this all the time, and you just should take my word for it. We need some studies. We need some more information. We didn't get, examples of other hospitals. I think, part of it is we need more information.
Yeah, and I think we want to protect that process too.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you're saying. I'm hearing you saying we can meet in the middle. I don't know, commissioners?
I just kind of want to go back to what I felt was kind of an agreement here, but I feel like it was in contradictory to kind of the way I understood what was going on. And that you mentioned that any new development would comply with the B3 code, but you just wanted to make sure that the existing structures didn't have to be torn down and moved to a different location. But yet, I guess my conflict in that is you're saying you want to add on to one of the buildings, and that is, I'm assuming, adding on in a non-conforming way, but to an existing building. I mean, I guess I'm just kind of confused as to, if you're going to build everything new according to the B3 code, why do we need to go through this? And the existing buildings, I mean, I guess in the end, I mean, if you're adding on to them, it makes sense that you add on to it, and it's going to be in kind of a non-conforming way. I would like to believe that the reasonability of this board and the city would always see it that way and approve it, although that may be a bit naive as well. But I'm also, as far as the whole site's concerned, we know if you don't have to ever come back and ask for permission, you're not going to. And if the city is fortunate someday, a year, 2 years, 3 years, to come up with a medical zoning, I don't really see that you're going to willingly submit yourselves to that new zoning if you've already got the zoning that I don't believe the property owner, the developer, is going to be that forthcoming at that point with, what they're willing to offer as far as removing their own, because I hear what you're saying 100% on the way you want something to build. We want to put people around it. But, I come from Kentucky, and Kentucky built another fantastic, the University of Kentucky built a beautiful medical facility right on the street, exactly kind of what this city's asking for. And it's a medical school as well. They've got plenty of money. It's plenty high. But, it works, and they put everything there. And I get this idea that we don't want to invest in all the resources of square footage before we actually have a renter to take this space, because, it's a business as well. It's not just to help the nursing mothers make it into the in there. They're making money as well. Right. And so, I guess I digress at that point. But yeah, so where is that? What are you asking for areas where you wouldn't necessarily have to comply with the B3 code? Because I'm looking at this, I see 5 different tax ID numbers on this paper, and 3 of those tax ID numbers have an existing building on it that, all except for maybe, one of them seems to be kind of non-conforming to having it up close to the frontage. At least the property line.
Yeah, they consider the 71.
That frontage.
Road that you have to front on. It's not that interior driveway.
And so, but like, say just these 2 sites on the, covered in trees over by Majestic Pine Drive. So you're not asking for anything to overlay those, or those would all be developed according to B3 code?
Yes.
And it's really just...
Yeah, there's nothing on there
to force it into a non-conforming situation.
Right, exactly. Yeah, all that would have to be. And it's my understanding too, just through your normal site development plan, City, if the city wants trees or bushes or landscaped areas or sidewalk connectivity, all of those are under normal functions of approving a site development plan as well. You don't have to do that through zoning.
Well,
It's-
and-
so-
And certainly I would agree, to add on to any one of these buildings to force 100% compliance with the code is unreasonable. And I think that, like I said, I think any board would see it that way, although boards change and who knows who gets on them. But to the point of compromise, is there a way that we can allow this, you know, with the existing buildings, but at the same time, if the city should ever endeavor to create some kind of overlay or some kind of, like, is there a time limit we can put on, not necessarily a time limit, but just say, you know, this is in effect until the city comes up with a new zoning overlay. Therefore, giving them the freedom to act now, but also at the same time, not the freedom to opt out of any future zoning as well.
I think you can do that, and the restriction that, yeah, any changes would need to go back through the neighborhood regulating process, you know, because we're, to my knowledge, codifying what's there today, so.
That makes sense.
I don't know what's wrong with mine.
Okay, thank you. I forgot my question now. So if I heard correctly, though, previously, your want is to remove the non-conforming use from the language, considering this campus because of the restrictions that it places. You want that language removed through this.
So it's not a non-conforming use, because again, our code
I'm
isn't
sorry, yeah.
use-based, it's non-conforming site requirements is
Right.
the issue, yeah.
So in doing this regulating plan, it's non-conforming based on our B3 codes now. What would be the process to remove that language?
That's what they're attempting to do with this, is having the neighborhood regulating plan say their buildings, that their lots don't have to be contiguous to the road, their buildings can be set back, their parking can be all in the first layer, they don't have to have sidewalks, they don't have to have street trees,
For what's existing?
for what's existing.
So can then it be also then, as we've all stated, written up or language changed to state that that only applies to what is existing? I mean, that would be my suggestion, because you bring up a good point. We don't have anything in the B3 codes. That is wonderful that that's brought to our attention, because now that's a goal that we can work toward achieving for future. However, I'm like Matt, what you have now it's already there, it's set. We're not asking you to change any of that, and you would have to come back to us anyway to add on to that. So my suggestion would be to change the language so that what's existing remains intact with no additional restrictions or variances needed, but anything else added.
And I will state this is for the neighborhood regulating plan, so this still doesn't apply to stormwater drainage or building codes. So you making a change interior to the site that triggers the building code requirements to come into compliance, that'll still be a requirement.
And if there are plans already in the works to expand, could we have them come back with that and table this until they come back with those plans for further discussion?
Well, I think they're wanting an answer
Right,
now
on this.
for
Yeah, I
their
think-
sale. But I think an expansion of it would need a new regulating plan or some other.
Right.
Or conformance with the B3 code.
I would just want to clarify, make sure I'm understanding what we're all saying here. What we're asking, and what could be a compromise, would be to approve the neighborhood regulating plan as submitted on the conditions that future development will go back through the process of going to the city under the, okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
that's correct. That's my understanding.
All right.
And to address the issue on timing, it is important because we're trying to secure the funds for the expansion. So we're trying to secure those funds so that we have the funds to be able to build the new add-on facility. We won't be able to do that if there's a red flag that says your building is not in conformance in all these different areas. no lender wants to touch that. So,
And you're wanting to move this forward to also, I mean, well, sounds like to also secure the surgeons, correct?
yes,
Right, so
we can keep those surgeons
so
in
if you're
Bastrop.
not able to keep those surgeons, would you still have plans on wanting to build and expand?
Yeah, Austin Hart has also asked us to, for 3,000 to 4,000 feet
So
for
if,
future expansion.
okay, so if we were to work something out and maybe have to extend to the 6 months, then you would still be able to proceed, just the lack of the importance of the surgeons, correct?
Yes, sir.
But
We
your
would-
hospital still will be built.
We're a long-term owner of this building.
right.
We're not, I mean, I know Allison has been referencing the Texas Oncology building that Gary owns, and that property will sell. But our property, we plan to hang on to for a long time. We are Premier Family Physicians is a 7,500 square foot tenant on our Lakeway medical office building across from Baylor Scott & White. And so we have a great relationship with them and want to continue to be. And also St. David's Healthcare is a good partner of ours as well. And so we want to continue. It's a great facility. We're glad to be here. So,
Okay, yeah, I'm in agreement, you know, I like a good compromise. I just want to make sure that, you know, while we're trying to rush or make things happen fast for you guys, for what y'all would like, that we don't overlook things that we would like for ourselves while we're trying to, you know, make this rush, so.
I get
Just
that.
want to
and
take that in
respect that.
consideration, that we don't.
I'd be doing the same things if I was in your shoes.
Just to clarify, you're Lee Jackson.
Yes.
Okay.
I am Lee Jackson.
I thought I missed a step. Okay, any other comments? One more. Go ahead.
Sorry, so I'm just trying to figure out where to place this because a motion is going to have to be made with specific language at some point that defines what everyone doesn't really, everyone's kind of having the same idea, but, so it seems like, back to the lender, the bank, lending money. What is there a specific objection that the existing structures have a somewhat dubious legal status,
That's correct.
rather than any addition to these structures being forced to comply with the new code?
Sure. Yes, because if you're a lender and the code says, and correct me, please, because you know the code a lot better than I do, but it's my understanding if you expand a building, the existing facilities are not protected. So if we expand our existing buildings, you guys could literally say, I want all 34, or in this case, 45,000 square feet to be pushed to the road.
That's not my understanding. I think there's a certain percentage of,
The code does say any expansion needs to be approved by ZBA of a nonconformity.
That
But usually there
portion.
is staff interpretation into there too on how that meets, so,
of that portion of the building, correct?
yeah. But we're not, as to our knowledge, nothing was changing, so that's why, it's common to say a building is legal nonconforming. Our language is, what is there today is legal nonconforming, so.
So I do houses, and if I have a garage that's up against a property line, that's illegal non-conforming. If I add on to that garage, I can't add on against that property line. I have to step back 5 feet. But that existing building could stay. So you're just playing with the new rules. So that's my understanding of legal non-conforming. I'm sure that applies from a site standpoint, and that's why we have, but we can look at this and your regulating plan would basically say, we're basically changing that language to say this works, correct?
I would say this works for what's existing
Correct.
today.
What's there now?
And the question, I guess, for y'all is like, if it burns down tomorrow, are you fine with it going back exactly the same way as it is, at the exact same footprint, so,
That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
If we agree.
Yeah.
If we agree to this regulating plan, we're saying that.
yes.
But we're also saying at the same time, my understanding from here is future development would still have to play by the rules to as much, at the extent as possible. I mean, that's where the
Yes.
compromise comes in, and we don't want to lose that leverage. I think we still want a walkable community. That's the reason we did the B3 code. So I think we can meet in the middle. But any other discussion?
Discussion? Discussion?
Well, I just want to make sure I know what we're actually, I feel like we do, but are we just approving an existing footprint to be exempt from And again, that footprint can always be developed in the future. If it burns down, rebuild it exactly the way it is, but any new footprint, it has to comply, and I like your words, as much as possible. And that would be a conversation this board would have about how that would develop.
That's what we're saying. If we approve this regulating plan, it's that legal non-conforming goes away, because now it's conforming to what this regulating plan is.
That would be for the
Just for the
street, that would
existing.
be for the
I think that's a
existing street
critical word to add in,
configuration,
just
lot
existing.
configuration, building configurations, yeah. So that's what the neighborhood regulating plan is establishing, so.
So I think I can put this in a motion where maybe we can understand it. So I'm going to make a motion. It's working. So I'm going to make a motion to approve the neighborhood regulating plan on conditions that future development will have to go back through the process to the city,
Back through the B3 code
to
process,
the B3 code process.
yes. Which
That's
there's-
my motion.
Have a second? Okay.
I have a question. Is it prudent for us to include in that motion the requirement that any future development requires an additional regulating plan? Because they don't always.
I don't know,
require
I
that.
think going through the B3 code process, because as I said, we've got a number of different pathways with a non-conforming site. One is to do a new regulating plan for the new additions. Another is for expansions or rebuilding to go through the non-conforming process. There's
But that
there's
would
several ways to go
guarantee that
through.
it would come back to this board.
Well, so neighborhood regulating plans are administratively reviewed unless we can't approve them. Then they come to y'all, so they may be able to submit it at the staff level and we could walk it through and approve it, so.
Understood.
So that could be a motion that goes back through the neighborhood regulating process, so.
Do we want to amend your motion, or? Because we're approving this regulating plan, but any future would have to go through another regulating plan. Am I understanding that correct?
Or go through
Well,
whatever applicable B3 code
That
process
was
is in
part of my
place.
motion, though. That was on the conditions. In my motion, I put conditions on approving this, but future development will go back through the process.
Yes.
So that would be the process.
Are you good with that? Or did you want to amend that?
I'm good with it. I thought we might make it a little stronger to make sure that any.
Define process to include?
I'm comfortable.
Okay. All right, so we're good with your motion. We got a second? Are we ready to vote? Okay. Go ahead and call the roll.
Cynthia Meyer,
Yes?
Shirley,
Yes.
Matt Lassen,
Yes.
Ishmael Harris,
Yes.
Pablo Cerna,
Yes?
Terry Kaler,
Yes.
Scott Long.
Yes.
Are you unanimous? Okay, thank you. All right, so next item, item 3D, hold public hearing and consider action on a recommendation for the Bastrop Business and Industrial Park zoning concept scheme, changing the zoning for 78.128 acres out of Bastrop Business Industrial Park Phase 1, Block A, Lot 1, and establishing a plan on 146.213 acres in the Bastrop Business and Industrial Park subdivision from P2 Rural to PEEC Employment Center located south of SH 71 within the city limits of Bastrop, Texas, and forward to the January 11th, 2022 City Council meeting. Ms.
Yes,
Wells.
so this item is rezoning with a zoning concept scheme. So that's our process for anything over 3.4 acres. You've got to show the zoning concept scheme along with the changes in the base zoning. So in this case, this is the property, this is the Bastrop Business and Industrial Park. This is the full boundaries. The crosshatched area to the east is the area that is being requested to be rezoned. I'll go to the zoning map real quick. So you can see right here, the gray area is Employment Center already, and then the purple area to the east is P2 Rural. And in our previous code, that was, I believe, a rural open space zoning designation that got converted over to P2 Rural. with the B3 code adoption. So we went from like to like. We didn't proactively rezone anything unless someone came during the process and asked for an upzoning or a downzoning during the process. Oh, sorry. So just background, so we're talking about rezoning specifically the 78 acres from P2 rural to PEC Employment Center to match the rest of the park. And they've laid out a zoning concept scheme over the 146 acres that shows how they'll extend the connectivity and lay out the blocks in this area. For the future land use, the future land use in this area is industry for the whole park. With their plan, they're showing 3 complete blocks and 2 partial blocks that are due to some already existing built conditions in the area. And they're showing the two street extensions of Technology Drive and South Jackson Street, and 2 new streets that will connect from those streets. So one of the things that we require now with our zoning concept scheme, so we're now, instead of just blanket rezoning something to a base district, we want to make sure that conceptually what they want to do will work on that site. So one of the requirements is a conceptual drainage plan. You can see on the blue lines, there's a number of existing creek waterways already going into the site from Tahitian Village, or Pine Forest Unit 6 to the east. The conceptual drainage plan shows that they will need a couple of detention ponds added to this area. That one at the south is approximately 4.5 acres. When we move further into actually constructing the roads and constructing these lots, those numbers will be tightened up. This is just to help lay out and know that there's enough room in those blocks to accommodate the drainage. So for the street network, this is my very skilled drawing on the computer. You can see the red lines are the new extensions of roads from the existing Technology Drive that's built. They also have, I didn't highlight it on there, they have a future extension of Technology Drive that'll go to the north as well. But you'll see they are going to extend Technology Drive that will eventually go over here, and it lines up with with a vacant lot in Pine Forest Unit 6, and with, I think, the part of Mauna Loa that is actually constructed at that point, and then extend South Jackson Street to Technology Drive, and then have another street that lines up with some currently undeveloped lots as well. So it'll provide 2 future points in and out of the subdivision. There's another new road to provide access to future lots, and it does dead end. It doesn't connect all the way through due to, you can see, I've kind of highlighted there. The topography shows you there's kind of a big ravine-ish geographic feature that will make it hard to build across, and you have a number of waterways through there as well. And you're lining up with a part of Mauna Loa that at this time is not constructed. There's, I think, a washout at about that location. Other street requirements, they did call out a specific street cross-section of our plan that can be adjusted by the city engineer during construction to match up with existing built conditions and the roads that are already there. But that's essentially, it's a regional commercial street for the industrial purposes. And they don't meet the block requirements, so a traffic impact analysis we're recommending to be completed at a later date during the public improvement plan. And what those look at is, so the site all will connect, to places outside of the subdivision and make sure that they're not creating a traffic issue at one of those locations, is what that'll look at. So for the proposed block structure, so in the PEC zoning, one of the features of that zoning is that it is meant to be unique. It's meant to be for large users that don't necessarily need some of that street frontage. They don't need some of the walkability is still something we'd strive for, but you're sometimes going to have your large 50,000 square foot buildings that are going to have trucks in and out. So it's a unique zoning district that you kind of code in some of your own standards. One of the things is we still request that it meets the 720 grid requirement which is the larger, which is a 2,880 block perimeter. In this case, due to some of the site conditions, and there are a number of pipeline easements running across as well, they're proposing 3 large complete blocks and then 2 partial blocks. When you hit the west side of the property, it's bounded by the Union Pacific Railroad, which won't allow any more at-grade crossings. And you have already existing lots and some topography to the east. So those would be complete blocks with the existing streets and new proposed streets. For the buildings, in this case, they'll have a variety of kind of office and industrial buildings. So they've shown examples of what's already in the park, that they have a mix of masonry and metal as on the building facades. They do have, most of them do actually have some kind of entryway feature, which usually is a gallery or arcade kind of structure on the front. And the sizes will vary greatly because some of them will be smaller office to larger warehouse or manufacturing. Some other requirements that we addressed in there is that they did, at the very front, you have where they filled in kind of the blanks of the table, the development standards table with the development standards they will use. They have a minimum setback, but they don't have a maximum, so there's no requirement to pull the buildings up close to the road. The place type allocations of the pedestrian shed can vary in this district. And then when they come down to some of the other uses in that table, individual users can still come in and request warrants during construction for other examples or other standards such as parking location and building frontage of build-to line, because the sites are all going to be for specific purposes. And I somehow got that in there twice. Public comments, we sent notices to 70 property owners surrounding this site. As of tonight, I can't add, we had 4 responses. 2 were in favor, 1 had no objection, 1 was opposed. And I think Nicole put the additional ones that weren't in your packet on the dais before the meeting. So the staff's recommendation is to hold the public hearing tonight and consider action to recommend approval to the city council and to forward that to the January 11th meeting. And the applicant is here if you have any questions.
Do we have anybody in the audience who's got any questions? I see.
Well, that'll be for the public hearing, so when you
Okay.
open the public hearing.
Yeah, so I guess we discuss it first correctly, is that correct? Yeah, so I guess commissioners, do you have any questions?
I just have a quick question. What are the issues in terms of the infrastructure needs that need to be addressed?
So of infrastructure, they have that in the plan. I didn't put it on the slide, but one of the pages shows future extension of utilities. So they will be extending water, wastewater, and the stormwater system along the streets and through the subdivision. It looks like there will be a need for an additional lift station because the low point of this subdivision is in the lower southwest corner. So sewage doesn't run uphill, so they'll have a lift station. So they've already identified that there will be extensions of the public utilities that'll go in, and those will be, so it's conceptually, we know that the utilities are there and they'll be able to extend them. And during the public improvement plans, that's when they'll come up with the actual construction plans to build all of that. And they kind of included a phasing plan, a general phasing plan, obviously that follows the streets. That their first phase is looking at that extension of South Jackson because they have some already end users that they're planning on going in that area. So did that answer the question?
There's a street at the bottom, proposed unnamed street on the south side. Looks like it's just going into the back of that neighborhood. I know that's not in the city limits. What's the deal on
That one?
the other side for that one? Yeah,
This
go
one?
down
This one?
that one.
So right now, that's just kind of conceptual. It's lined up with currently vacant lots. So we
Okay.
would, city would have to acquire those lots to extend the road through.
Okay.
But it's, at this point, so we are limited with some existing platted and built conditions out there, so this is trying to address that as well as we can. But there will be need for future plans to get those roads actually connected.
That's a
So
point of connectivity there.
it's a point of connectivity. So this plan proves they can provide that connectivity. There's some additional steps to get the connectivity there to them, so.
There was no desire to try to face the railroad in any way.
Face the railroad?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know what that railroad looks like over there, but, you know.
The railroad?
Well, you know, sometimes like Fayette Street on here, you know, it's facing into the railroad.
Oh, no, there was, so.
It's all
so
facing inwards,
Part
is
of
what
the
I'm saying.
subdivision, so part of this, since it has been a zoned EC, there are already existing buildings that are built that are facing Technology Drive, so.
Okay.
You've already got lots that are constructed along here, existing buildings that face that, not the railroad. And I don't think there's any particular advantage to facing the railroad in this location, so.
To the connectivity question, as Paul was kind of asking, so over where we're connecting, not south, but over to the east on that extension of Technology. So the EDC owns one of those lots, and I think Bastrop Independent School District owns the other. I realize there's a replatting issue, but it seems like a very easy time to solve that problem right now, rather than, I mean, because that's going to have to be addressed at some point, and it's a headache to address. It seems like they already own one of the piece of property. With some simple platting and replatting, they could solve that problem right now and have that connectivity ironed out. I'm not sure about the ownership of where they've exactly lined it to the south, but EDC may or may not own those lots, but it also seems like a decent time to address that. Now, they may not own them, but there are certain things about this that seem a little too simple and easy. I'm a little bit concerned about the way we've talked about, where is it here? So the packet says, you know, the B3 code intent, you know, there are 3 core elements of the B3 codes. The third one, perpetuation of authentic Bastrop, the explanation in the end says, the connection of Technology Drive and South Jackson Street furthers the neighborhood's development in the same built form that was established in the earlier phases of the Bastrop Business and Industrial Park. We certainly just heard a case about a hospital that followed that same guideline, but yet was forced a whole new way of doing things and had to go through quite a bit of headache to get what they wanted, to seem like we're just handing to the EDC on this one. And then the architectural styles proposed are in accordance with the existing style of development in the park and include primary frontages, architectural encroachments. So certainly the architectural encroachments are nice, but are we not proposing that they build on the street and put parking behind the buildings?
So their development tables still specify that their parking will be in the 3rd layer.
Okay.
So that's still in there. But they are proposing to not have a minimum build-to line, so.
Because I'm really seeing why they can't be P5 and just comply.
Well, so one of it is the block structure. So they're asking for a larger, P5 block structure is our 330 grid. So with industrial sites, typically, in a 330 grid gives you a 2.5 acre site. So typically an industrial user usually needs more than a 2.5 acre site, so, or business park user.
Well, and it seems like if someone comes with that large of a use, that's kind of an adjoinment of properties that maybe this board could overhear and see exactly what they kind of want to do. You know, and therefore we can put the controls in place to make sure that they develop the way that the city has decided they want it to develop. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that.
Any other discussion? Oh, so go ahead and open the public hearing?
Yes.
Okay, so go ahead and open the public hearing. If there's anyone wishing to speak? You can
Yeah,
state
hi,
your name
my-
and
my-
address.
My name is Denise Smith, and I live at 208 Hianaha Lulu Lane, and I'm right on the city line. County on one side of on my side of the fence, city on the other side, and it runs. I'm adjacent to the power line road through there. right in back of the new power station. And I can see the crosshatch when I looked at the very small grid that I was shown. And it looks like it's right in my backyard. And before I have anything to say really, I'd like to see what you presented earlier, the screen before, with their proposed, that. And then the one with more detail. That, yeah. I think that, I just want to see how I'm going to be impacted by this. I'm really nervous about it, and I just want to watch before I have anything really to say, okay?
Okay.
I don't know. Is that fair? So can I get one of those?
Certainly. It's a matter of public record.
My name's Peter Langhans,
Yes.
and I live at the same address. And we are the one that wasn't for it. But our main thing is like, what's it gonna impact? Like, is there gonna be a buffer of trees on the back side of this, or are we gonna look at this thing? That's really what our concern is.
noise.
Because we already got, you know, messed up by the power station. We're looking at that now. We used to have a green belt, now we got a power station. So straight across from that, because our house is basically where that curve is, you know, we look at the power station, and
Yeah.
then we go up, like, no, this way though,
We're
to
done.
the left. We're on the street, you know.
Yep, right about there.
And so where your red line is that where the buildings are gonna start? Is there gonna be a buffer of trees so we don't see this thing? That's our main thing. We just don't want to look at a business park. We already have a power station. You know, we built a really nice place there, bought the lot next door, and I don't want to look at this business park. So if you could tell me that there's gonna be a big buffer of trees there, and I'm not gonna see it, that would really make me feel better about this. That's really what our whole concern is, because we just don't want to.
My understanding is you're,
Look at that.
my understanding is you are in the county, correct?
So.
I'm sorry?
You're in the county? Or is your property in the county? or in
It's
the-
county, yes, it's county.
Okay, so it's county.
Do you know how, like where that street you're building, are you gonna build warehouses on this side of it, all the way up to the tree line, up to the power station?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a process for that part of development.
So we are going to
No,
look
there's going to be a process for the development there. This
so
is
there'll
a,
be a later date to argue this point, or?
well, I think right now, well, I don't know if I should be addressing this
So our code does not have any buffer requirements for
Against the
adjacent
county.
uses. Mhm.
correct?
You can just take every last tree down. up
So
to
no,
the
we
power
do have tree protection though. So our code does require that we protect, we have protected trees and heritage trees, and if those are, those have to be approved for removal by the Development Review Committee. So that's any tree 13 inches and greater is a protected tree, any tree 24 inches and greater is a heritage tree. If those are taken down, they have to be replaced. So if there is already a stand of trees there and for some reason they take them down, they'll have to replace on site, and they will, and that would be probably where
Our
they put
code, to
them.
his point, our code encourages the buildings up closer to the street. And so I think that's, I mean, that's, we have,
But
we don't have a plan, and we're not the developer, but our code is encouraging that the buildings are up close to those red lines where the streets are. So that's farther away from where I understand you would be located.
I think there might still be some trees left.
We have, yeah, our B3 code wants, yes. I would think if I were developing, correct. Yeah, they're not going to be, well, if I were developing, well, our code encourages development. That's the issue we had with the previous site plan, is that the building placement be up close to the street.
yeah, but there is no minimum, so in this case.
There's no minimum, so
they
there's-
are requesting that they could set back as far as they
Yeah.
want, but their current development standard table still says the parking will be in the third layer, so parking will be behind the building, so.
That's a good point. So, yeah.
So parking could be in the back, but yeah, we do have tree protection requirements and tree mitigation that will be required.
But we don't have any kind
During
of-
site development.
Yeah, we don't have
so
any kind of compatibility buffer.
We do not, no.
So, and
unless
that's- and
you'd
that's-
like to recommend that as a condition, so.
We could. I don't know if y'all are listening, but a compatibility buffer may be a good way to handle what you're talking about.
Wait, microphone.
Sorry, it's not, there we go. So if we had these same conditions, but it was all within the city, can you describe remind me what the buffer would be
It would
between,
be the same. It's the same whether it's in the city or the ETJ.
or abutting okay.
Yeah, we don't, so again, since our code is form-based,
Mm-hmm.
the form-based nature is that we are concerned about the interaction between the public and private realm, pulling the buildings up front, and then once you get in the rear yard,
Mm-hmm.
we have less controls back there. We still do have heritage trees, we still do have drainage requirements, all of those things, but that was part of our kind of deregulated approach to the code, was not to have those kind of different requirements.
What's the size replacement for those trees?
I believe they're 3-inch trees. So
3-inch
for every
trees.
inch they remove, they have to replace inch per inch, and at
Okay.
3-inch trees. Yeah.
Okay.
I've seen 25-foot compatibility buffers in other municipalities to handle the situation where you're up against a neighborhood. And the compatibility buffer is all green trees, usually.
Yeah. So that would be, that is not part of their plan, and it's not part of the development standards in the B3 code.
Might be, makes sense since that they're all right there around the neighborhoods, maybe that would be.
Yeah, and to their point, that chunk in the corner, you can see the red line goes around it. That's an existing LCRA power station that's owned by LCRA, or Blue Bonnet Power Station, so that's not part of the rezoning request.
But those lots on the south and on the east are the backyards, correct?
Yes, yeah, so the lots all front, if I can find
Yeah, they
my
front the
thing.
street.
So, yeah, all of these lots, and I will say along Mauna Loa, I don't know how many are actually constructed on this side, because a lot of you can see the line ends, that part of Mauna Loa isn't actually constructed. And then Kilauea, there are a number of houses that are already built on that one.
Yeah, I think 25 feet's nothing. Compatibility, from a compatibility buffer,
So
that's
a green landscape buffer.
just a compatibility, right, just to kind of correct a green buffer, which,
What's the size of the parcel that we're looking at? I'm sorry, I didn't.
The entire site, so the entire purple area is 78 acres. So it's a fairly large, and so they've currently just broken it down into blocks, because again, with industrial users or business park users, you don't always know what size lots will need to be, since it's owned by the BEDC, they're trying to bring employers to Bastrop.
Sure.
So-
The city that I work for requires a 100-foot greenbelt space between residential and commercial. And I feel like for a site that's this large, that is residential abutting on two sides, that wouldn't, even if you had a 100-foot greenbelt zone, you're still gonna have a lot of room to work with. And because of how close it is to the nature trails and everything there, I would maybe want to consider a larger greenbelt buffer.
So the depth right there of that blue block is about 1,000 feet. So from the proposed street extension to the back of the property would be 1,000 feet depth, so, ish. Maybe a little shorter.
yeah, I think a compatibility buffer at a certain depth is a good way to mitigate what the concerns are here.
It's probably 750. I'm revising my number. I just saw what that actually was telling me. So it's about 750 depth. So you'd have a 100-foot buffer out of a 750 depth.
So do I close the
Yeah, if there's
public?
no other public comments.
Are there
then
any
you can-
public comments at this time? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that part of this and then open it up back to any motion. Would the applicant wish to
We've
speak?
got- all right, David? I've got David, he's with the engineering company, and then Angela is representing the BEDC.
Okay.
Well, I'm Kevin.
Do you-
Hi, I'm David Spiker with Doucette and Associates, and I'm representing, I guess, on behalf of the EDC. I'm here. So, who have questions? I would first state that I think a landscape buffer, or however you called it, between industrial and residential is it's a viable, in general, most cities that we do work in, that's a requirement, so.
Sure.
I think you mentioned that. I don't know about the 100-foot. If we only have 700 feet, that could be too much, but I think maybe, if you put one in there, if you decide to do that tonight, maybe we put the verbiage in that we don't remove any trees within that buffer, because I should be one of the maps that show you all the trees that exist.
Sure. Yeah, that's all.
I mean, it's loaded with trees, and, am I correct on that? Yeah, there's a lot of trees out there, and based off of your tree plan, or your tree mitigation plan, they're not gonna wanna knock down those trees, because they're gonna have to plant so many more to replace all those. So it's a good idea. I think it'll work for the developers and for your neighbors. Did you want to add anything else to that?
I have to apologize. Jean is the project manager. She got called out of town, so I'm here just as, pinch hitting. If you have any questions, I was looking at our own restrictive covenants, which we have for the park, and we do have restrictions on odorous matter, noise. You've seen them, right? There's at least one mention of berm. I was just doing a really quick look. So these are all things that have come up in past meetings and past boards have talked about. So I'm sure they're going to take those kinds of things into consideration. Just, it's been several years since we've talked about putting in any infrastructure in the park.
Okay. Any other questions? And as far as the depth of that, hundreds, a lot of you, what?
Maybe 75 might be an appropriate number, because that'd be 10%.
50. Well, I think if you say, well, I don't know, I'm familiar with 25, but that's a tighter density, so this is wide open space, but, that's, I don't, the way this is split up, that other shows kind of 75 is fine. We can say that. And I think the point is no trees to be removed, green belt to serve as a compatibility buffer, I think, and that would be sufficient. I think he's that.
And is that specified to the southern and eastern boundaries?
I would put it against, neighborhood.
The neighborhood.
If the property's up against a neighborhood,
Platted, well, so that's.
we can't say neighborhood, right?
So it's in the county, so
It's
there's
in
no
the county.
zoning there, it's ETJ. So there's a little bit that's zoned at the top. So if you just specified probably the southern boundary and the
Okay.
eastern boundary, because that's
We'd
the
have to do
part
it that
that
way,
is up
'cause
against.
that's in the county. Somebody want to give us a motion?
So we are televised, so yeah, if you don't turn the mics on, people can't hear you and we
Well,
get
the buttons
complaints.
don't work half the time. So where this comes out is right there at where 2171, right there where that whole interchange is, correct?
At the north side, yeah. So
Right.
so South Jackson connects up to 95.
Right, to 95,
And
21.
then eventually, they're also going to have a second connection. Technology will connect up there at Jasper Street. It's a little off the map.
And I guess it's a little premature to ask, but if you're putting a bunch of warehousing and possibly trucking and everything else in there, is there going to be any type of study as far as how that's going to impact traffic at an already jammed up intersection?
Yeah, so that's what the traffic impact analysis, that'll be done during the public improvement phase. That'll address that.
Okay, thanks.
Any improvements that need to be made.
Any other discussion?
Can I make one more comment?
Yes, please.
Could you put up the streets again? So again, I would agree about connectivity. You all mentioned point of connectivity. The connectivity we have going to the east is just above the electrical substation. I think it makes sense. I'm not too sure I agree with this one that's attaching to the south. You're gonna have, I'd hate for this road end to be a cut-through for people who are trying to avoid traffic, and all of a sudden you end up with a subdivision to the south that's getting loaded with industrial vehicles and a lot more automobiles. I don't know if we're binded by this now or not, but I don't really think that that's gonna work well. That's just my engineering judgment, and I'd like for y'all to consider not connecting that as well. We were asked to put that in there, so we did.
Personal opinion, I don't think you'll see the industrial traffic going through that. I think you'll see the neighborhood traffic going through the industrial park would be because from that point to get back out of Tahitian, you've got to go kind of through a winding path, get back over the railroad tracks, back up to Lovers, which has its own backup, so.
I guess, but the point of putting that at that point was to make that connection at that side of the site.
Yeah, I try to provide an additional point of connectivity,
Correct.
so.
And
it
it's
may-
far enough away
It
from
may
the
need
other
to
parts.
shift depending on where we can find, yeah, a lot that we can cut through.
It's workable.
It's up to you guys, I just wanted to get my.
I'm going to go with what Jennifer did. I think I'm going to say I'm okay with that. I do think the real issue here is the compatibility that close to the neighborhoods. What can we do to help that situation? They may be our city down the road, so go ahead.
I'm sorry. Here we go. So when a motion is made tonight on this, will it also have conditions about the tree removal included in the motion?
If the motion contains that language, yes.
Thank you.
All right. If there's no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion. I can't do it.
I don't know what's
South
going
and
on.
east.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, south and east sides, there you go. Yeah, up against
Okay,
these
here we
flat
go.
lots to the south and east sides.
I will motion to approve with the condition of a 75-foot south and east buffer between this development and residential that would prohibit the removal of trees within that greenbelt space.
I second.
I got a motion and a second. Go ahead and call the roll.
Carrie Kaler. Ishmael Harris.
Yes.
Cynthia Meyer.
Yes.
Matt Lassen.
No.
Cheryl Lee.
Yes.
Pablo Serna.
Yes?
Scott Long.
Yes.
Motion carries.
6-1.
All right. All right, so let's go ahead and we're on to the next item. Updates. Item 4A, update on recent city council actions regarding planning department items.
So, since our last meeting, we've had one city council meeting, and that was on Tuesday. So that was a little bit of a long night, but we had the Farm Street Village zoning concept scheme and rezoning that went for their second reading. The rezoning and the zoning concept scheme for Farm Street Village, the multifamily development, was denied by council. And then we also had the Pecan Park commercial rezoning. That was to amend how many apartments are allowed in the building height. We had the public hearing, and due to some timing with the developer, they did the first and the second reading at that meeting, so it's approved by council. So those are the two things.
I'm going to say something about that. I think it would be good to re-engage our public a little bit more on what we did with B3 codes. In my opinion, the plan that was presented kind of checked off a lot of those boxes and was going to provide some diverse family housing that's going to be needed. In my opinion, if we make everything single family, we're going to have gentrification run rampant, and we're going to lose the traditional aspect of neighborhoods and of the people that live here.
Just to that point, I wasn't there for that meeting, and honestly, I was surprised that it passed. Not because we don't need more housing in Bastrop, we absolutely do, but I feel that with the passing of the B3 codes and fiscal sustainability that we've decided is so important, fees have gone up on homeowners in the city of Bastrop tremendously. You know, I know of several people doing things that, you know, in a conversation with staff and things like that, it's a simple, yeah, do this, do that, ends up costing $5,000 to $10,000. And what we find is that the cost of housing is going up in Bastrop from single ownership as well. You know, you've got families that have lived in Bastrop for 100 years that even if they're break off a piece of land and donate it or give it to one of the children, they can't afford to build on it because of a lot of the stuff we put on it. So our code is gentrifying the city just to begin with. And I understand the need for affordable housing, and I feel we're in one way destroying affordable housing within the city. And building apartments where, and I get it, people from Elgin, people from Smithfield, people from all over need a place to live, but these aren't the core historic people of Bastrop that can no longer afford to live here. They're people that, yeah, it's a housing problem, and I get it, it's a large issue, you know, but at the same time, as a city, we kind of voted on a code that intentionally gentrifies the area based on the requirements that are needed to develop. But then, you know, we go and solve it in that way, which I personally thought, although the intent was fantastic to provide affordable housing, it wasn't going to give the city the authenticity that it's always had and deserves. It's always been kind of a city of kind of families and houses, and families need places to live all over, but there needs to be a better way to solve it. I personally am happy that it was denied by city council, and I think it's something the city needs to work for is figuring out a way to provide affordable housing, but at the same time, I don't think that setting aside a number of the development guidelines that the code has was right in this case.
To the point that I see it completely different. I think that if you have a homogeneous zoning in this, housing type, not zoning, housing types, where they're all single family, and our B3 code can allow multiple, there's no minimum lot. There could be a lot of houses placed on that 15 acres creatively, and would have to stay within the grid, of course. But those houses are going to be some of the most expensive houses, the new houses going up, just because of the proximity to what's becoming a really good downtown Main Street area. And so I believe that, and I live really close to this, my property taxes have gone up and up and up, and it's not going to go down. And how do you deal with that? You have to have a variety of housing types. If more people want to live, I had one of my kids speak, and they couldn't afford to live here. They can't. So we're not talking about government housing. We're talking about just some affordable, walkable distance to Main Street. How do you do that? I think the only way to do that is to have a variety of housing types. This happened to be surrounded by a place type that I was trying to match on 3 sides. I don't know if we'll get it set, but I mean, it's water under the bridge now. I just think that we need to re-engage our community a little bit, because I found a lot of the resistance to it was a little misinformed on what this could be. And I don't know how that fell, maybe on the developer for not relaying that. I know they tried. I went to a meeting that they held after the first reading, and nobody showed up practically. And so I think it's upon us and maybe the city to kind of re-engage the citizen and say, this is what we're doing. And we are going to try to think about these things. And this is not going to be the first time that's going to come up. I think we're going to have more and more of these coming up, and those 3 things have to kind of fit in with authentic Bastrop. That's what you're talking about. And what is authentic Bastrop? And then we went through extreme efforts to try to, what that DNA was and what that meant. And I think one of the things I got out of that is, that grid pattern and the housing. But if we just make it all single-family housing, like it sounds like we want to do, because we don't want apartments, we're going to be short-sighted, because you can put duplexes on there. They're going to be 2-story. They're going to be I think you can get a 2.5, correct?
2, it's 2-story.
Okay, 2-story. 2-story apartments are going to look into somebody's backyard, because that was one of the comments that came back. They're going to look in my backyard.
It was 3 stories for P4, but 2 stories for P3s.
Okay, so you can do some pretty tight housing at 2-story. I don't think we're solving everything, my opinion.
So on that, are we clearly defining the difference in affordable housing and low-income housing? I mean, because to me, like, affordable housing also would depend on what your income is, right?
There's national definitions, and then there's state definitions for different housing programs. So when you talk about there's Section 8 housing, public housing, those are your extremely low-income housing. Those are your 0 to 30% of income earners. When we're talking low-income housing, we're talking the people that make 60, usually 50 or 60 to 80% of area median income. For the state programs and federal programs, that is linked to the Austin MSA. I will say usually those numbers they quote for the maximum prices also include utilities, because it's a maximum price of rent and utilities is the definition that you shouldn't spend more than 30% of your gross income on housing and utilities. So a person making, I can't do math in my head real quick, but $30,000, 30% of their income is going to be about $10,000 a year. They're generally going to fall into your, fairly low income categories that probably wouldn't even be able to qualify for this. It's really meant, in this case, they kept using the term workforce housing because that is talking about more that 50 to 100% of the median income. And for the Austin area, median income for a family of four is about $80,000 a year.
And yeah,
At
and
100%.
like, it's just a lot of people around here that don't, they could fit into that category of low income. And I just hear us constantly say something about affordable living. And a lot of people can't afford to live in the affordable living apartments that we have here.
Yes, and that's,
So it gets tossed around, but, it's just,
yeah, there's
still
there's
people
several
that are
different-
left out.
Yeah, there's definitely, and I will say, so in my previous life, I was actually a housing person. I was a housing planner. And that 0 to 30%, that extremely low income bracket, that you're talking public housing, Section 8, they don't make any of that housing anymore, and the market will not provide it. There's no affordability for a developer to make that for it. So that is an extreme issue nationwide. That's not Bastrop, that's everywhere. And so that's a struggle. There's no good silver bullet answer to it. But trying to create a diversity of housing is a first step to not have all $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes in town, which is, with single-family housing, apparently the direction our prices are going. So,
To Pablo's point, I think that maybe that's where I'm with Ishmael, is I think that a lot of focus was placed on affordable housing, and there's a misunderstanding of what that means in today's time. I think that I was in favor of, I was kind of half and half on it. I'm certainly in favor of affordable housing. I'm from Bastrop. My son was raised here, graduated here. He was going to move to Austin to get an affordable place to stay. He wants to branch out on his own, and that was at $1,100 because there was nothing in Bastrop that would offer home for him, not even to rent or an apartment at that at his price point. And his life is here, so he was willing to move to Austin, drive home every day to hang out with his buddies, and then go back to Austin because he wants his own place. I convinced him to hold off because he's a responsible child and I don't mind him staying at the house with me because he can't afford on his salary to live. I think that we need to get away from this conception or understanding that affordable housing means Section 8. There are families that need a place to stay, and it might not be a home. And Bastrop is not that big. We don't have that many places to put much of anything within the city limits, so we're trying to work with what we have and to take that away from residents who truly are good neighbors and will help out neighbors in the neighborhood. I think it's unfortunate. Having said that, one of the reasons I would have been opposed to it was because of the traffic concerns in that area. But I just really would like people to understand that Bastrop is going to grow and everybody can't afford a $300,000 home. We have to be willing to be neighborly, which is what we say we are in this community, and open to the changes that are inevitably going to come.
I'd like to echo Pablo and Cheryl's sentiments about this. I think I shared the concerns regarding traffic. I shared deep concerns regarding the parking, the number of parking spaces for the number of proposed units. That said, we need, when we talk about affordable housing, part of what we need is service sector housing for all of those services that we all enjoy, whether that's, you know, going out to a restaurant or, you know, a dental assistant or you know, whatever it is, there's a huge swath of folks in various parts of the service industry who don't have housing or having to commute huge distances. And that also plays into having, you know, job shortages, having businesses that don't have positions they can't fill because, you know, there's no housing for that to help. So it feeds the economic development. It allows people to be able to live proximate, drive less, you know, walk their kids to school. So, you know, I understand. I understand people's concern, but to Pablo's point, you know, if you can pack in a bunch of duplexes, you know, they might not fit with the design integrity that was proposed in that plan. And so I find it that kind of not in my backyard argument to not hold water after a certain point. So
yeah, I think going forward, one of the things that we're going to probably strive to do is maybe kind of come back and have what I called it a B3 code boot camp, both P and Z, you know, maybe this, you know, maybe public at some point in the future, and just kind of go reiterate what the main points of the code were meant to address, you know, so we can try to recalibrate where we are on all of that. But so that'll be something we'll bring up in the spring. So.
Agree. Any other? Okay, so item 4B, individual requests from planning and zoning commissioners that particular items to be listed on future agendas.
So one of the requests you had, Pablo, at the last meeting was to have a TIA, traffic impact analysis workshop, to discuss what actually is a TIA and what actually comes out of a TIA, because they're not magical. They're a study. There's pros and cons to requiring them. So we were working with our TIA consultant to come in January to the meeting to do that workshop.
Good, because I think there's some, like you said, magical. Did we do the study?
And I will say that requiring a TIA prior to zoning is unusual. That was not a requirement of our previous code. That's not a requirement in a lot of cities to have a TIA prior to zoning. So that's just, but so we'll go over that. When are they appropriate? Where? What do they actually do? What do they not do sometimes? So we'll be doing that in January.
I guess the boot camp is something, just maybe an explanation too of housing types. I do think that.
And how a form-based code works. I think that's still one that I think we got there initially. I think it's just some, you know, the re-education on what that means. That the uses are wide open. We're not regulating by uses, but we're regulating by the building blocks and building types. So that's when we talk about the, you know, building types in the BEDC, their requirement is commercial buildings. So those can take a lot of different forms, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Any other request? Okay, moving along here, I got 4C, Building and Planning Department Monthly Projects Volume Report.
Yep, so we're holding pretty steady. We had 30 new single-family residential for the month of November. That tracks about how many, I think we were 25 the month before, so we're holding steady at new units in town. And then on the planning side, it's about the same amount of general applications. I will say we're in a phase of, I call it the entitlement phase. So a lot of zoning concept schemes, a lot of working out development agreement, you know, language of how it actually gets implemented. And that's a more time-intensive time on the planning side. Once we get into the building side, even the public construction plan side, that's engineering. It's a lot more straightforward. So planning's been busy the last couple months, and I've been back now for, I think, a month now. This was a long week, so it's
Great. All right, item 5, adjournment.
Make a motion to adjourn?
All right, thank you.
Always get that one.